Welcome to webinar 4, where we look at learning intentions and success criteria. This is following on directly from our last webinar, where we asked you to look at data in your classroom and to use the data in your classroom to inform your case study for improvement, to identify some features of highly effective practice, and where we learned that, in fact, learning intentions and success criteria can contribute in a great way to children's success in their learning and to Therese attainment. So we will take you through, firstly, learning intentions, and followed on by success criteria, and hopefully arrive at a greater understanding of the impact that these can have in your classroom. In IOC, we have a saying that we hang our hats on learning intentions and success criteria to be the driver to lead so many opportunities for effective teaching and learning in your classroom. They are particularly effective when they are done well. Of course, like anything, like any intervention, like any effective strategy in your classroom, there are a lot of myths and misconceptions around learning intentions and success criteria, and we will dispel these myths and provide you with a definitive answer and explanation around these. They drive so many things forward in our lessons, and we will take you through just how their impact can be wide-ranging in every lesson. But first and foremost, learning intentions must be credible. They must be credible to the children. They must not be muddied. They must not be unclear. They must truly reflect what is going to be taught or learned. So, learning intentions, and we'll take you through a number of bullet points here and give a wee bit of explanation as to what each actually means. It may sound obvious, but they are absolutely linked to experiences and outcomes. It's always our starting point in planning, and equally, that planning should take into account your learning intentions. That's where the planning should be, and it should always be linked to experiences and outcomes and your learning intentions too. E&O, as you know, will always have a skill, and in your learning intentions, you can identify and must identify that skill so that the children are aware of what the skill is that they're learning. Now, I'm going to take you on and explore these 3 key elements of learning intentions, and something perhaps that we don't teach explicitly or we're not aware of being explicit in learning intentions and success criteria, particularly learning intentions, is that there can be different types. So what they must do, learning intentions, is describe what the learners should know. So the knowledge that they will have from the learning intentions, what they will gain, what they will begin to understand, what their understanding will be at the end of the lesson, and be able to do in their new learning. Be able to do is a skill. Okay, so there's 3 things there: knowledge, understanding, and skill in new learning. There should be a focus on this knowledge, and children should be aware of opportunities to transfer these skills. Now, from the OECD report, you will know that there has been criticism in our curriculum around the mismatch, perhaps, in the knowledge that we are teaching, without too much of a focus on the skills. However, you devise and you plan effective learning intentions, and you will give that broad range of knowledge and those transferable skills, and these being explicit to the children in their learning. While we focus on this transferable knowledge and skill, we have to be very, very careful when we are creating our learning intentions that we are creating these in mind and not focusing on the context for learning. So what we must be aware of is that learning intentions must be decontextualised, take out of that context, and I'll explain what I mean by that. If the context is not central to the skill, it then must become transferable. It must become something that the children can apply in a range of activities. Okay, so all too often there's a context attached to a learning intention for it. For example, I can create a character in a science fiction story, or I can create a character of an alien that comes to land. I can recall or recount 3 facts from Goldilocks and the 3 bears. I can calculate strategies in multiplication. The context there are about a genre, science fiction, or an alien landing, alien character. Context there, Goldilocks and 3 bears. Context there, multiplication, which may be appropriate if the context is appropriate for the skill. However, when you do start to put contexts in like Goldilocks and the 3 bears or science fiction, or be specific to using calculating strategies in one particular area, what in actual fact you're doing is limiting the children's understanding of that skill and suggesting that this skill to recreate, so that's the skills we're talking about, recreate, recall, calculate, but the message is they can only do that within that context. And that in turn actually confuses the success criteria. And that's again the message being that it's not transferable, this transferable knowledge and skill that our learning intentions must focus on, and not the context for learning. It may seem very, very obvious when we say use clear language that the learners, the children, can understand, and you perhaps heard language using that's out with children's understanding, and I know there's a balance to be had by using words, like annotate and so on, but if it's within the context of a learning intention where you're trying to be explicit in what the children are learning, it will just confuse the children. It will just confuse what it is they're trying to learn. So be clear, be specific. Now, we will resurrect HOTS over the course of the next few webinars when we start to look at features of highly effective practice, because that in itself is excellent language in terms of children understanding what it is the skill is and being specific to the skill and to its transference into other areas. So HOTS is a particularly useful language to keep in mind when constructing your learning intention, but again, as long as it's clear and very, very understandable by the children. Now, again, it seems very obvious, but it can't be just appear on the wall or the board. It's something that's shared with learners. And what I would say the main emphasis on this point here is that it's referred to throughout the learning experience. And again, having visited lots of classrooms across lots of authorities, it can be something that's wheeled out or wheeled up or put in the smartboard at the very beginning of a lesson, and it never features again. And in fact, sometimes we see that it only makes an appearance at the plenary, which in actual fact would be the post-mortem, because it's not referred to throughout the learning and it's not had the impact that it's needed to continually refer to. And I'll speak a wee bit more about just what that does in your lesson when you do return to it. Here, I cannot emphasise enough, and this is something that we absolutely ask you to have courage and conviction in, that you do not, and if you do, stop copying or asking your children to copy learning intentions and success criteria into their jotters. It is not going to accelerate their learning in the slightest. There is no evidence to suggest that, and Hattie, in his book Visible Learning Feedback, which I will refer to throughout, suggests that there is absolutely no mileage in it whatsoever. And even those situations where you believe I could cut it out and stick it into their jotters, none of that will do anything other than take up your precious planning time. So another cautionary tale about learning intentions, that absolutely not to be copied in like headings or to be copied into jotters or stuck into jotters. It will not accelerate the children's learning, and it will not mean that they understand the learning any better. Again, seems really obvious to be linked with planned assessment activities. The point being made here is when you plan your learning intentions, and it's not ad hoc, it's not just at the moment of starting the lesson, it's a well planned and well intended outcome for the children, that it's clear as to what the outcome that you want, and what you've planned, how you've planned the assessments, that there is assessment activities throughout your lesson, and not just at the plenary or the post-mortem, that they are at the very onset of your lesson, and that becomes at the very, very beginning of our learning intentions. Okay, so now I'm going to revisit the points that we made in one of our first slides, was where learning intentions cover a variety of key points of learning. The most common element that a learning intention can focus on, and again I think where the myths and misconceptions are around, is that learning intentions are primarily about skills. And absolutely, yes, it's very, very important. We've already said that learning intentions should focus on a skill, and that can be derived from an experience and outcome. But as you'll remember, we have also said that it should also describe what the children should know, understand, or be able to do, so the skill. So absolutely, create your learning intentions that focus on skills, that highlight the skill to the child about what it is they're going to do. Again, transference of skills is very, very important, and the relevance of these skills to children, again, is very, very important. To be able to write a recount, to be able to apply more than one strategy to solve a problem, to be able to contribute as part of a team, to be able to experiment with a variety of media to achieve the stated effect. Okay, skills are derived from the E and O, but what you must notice here is there's not a context in sight. Everything is pure skills, not a recount about my trip to the Kelvin Grove Art Galleries, not being able to apply more than one strategy to solve a division problem. To be able to contribute as part of a team. It's a skill. Many skills to that. The success criteria that will sit under that will be able to support that learning intention there in terms of what the skills the children will develop. And again, lack of context around our final point there, again, suggesting that there's a lot of skill involved in using a variety of media. And again, success criteria that sits under that will show the steps to acquiring that skill. Moving now to consider learning intentions and a focus on knowledge. We can absolutely create learning intentions that will ascertain knowledge or share knowledge with children. It's important that you understand the type of learning intention that you're planning, the type of learning intention that you're sharing, because as we say, there is more than one. Other than skills, there's more. There's knowledge. Now, consider the timing of this learning intention. When would you use this learning intention, and a learning intention for knowledge? Knowledge about a topic, e.g. different types of energy. Would you use this at the beginning of this topic to ascertain the prior knowledge? And again, you will know the effect size of doing that in any lesson when you understand children's starting point. Again, something Hattie refers to, and something we will refer to again in future webinars about the importance of that. Equally, this could be at the end of a topic. I've created a learning intention to understand the knowledge the children have gained about different types of energy. how to construct a graph. It could be at the very beginning. Again, what's their prior knowledge? Again, about, how, why. Why does something happen? Why are foxes now in our cities? Or the what causes a tsunami? Now, again, there are context attached here, but if you understand how you're using these type of learning intentions, is it to understand their knowledge of these topics, or is it about the knowledge they've gained through the block of learning that you have just delivered? Again, this is a time where perhaps it doesn't need to be decontextualised, because the context is important here to the skill of knowledge, to the knowledge, to that what they have learned. So again, the planning is key here. The planning of your learning intention and bearing in mind the purpose of your learning intention. Okay, now this one meets with a bit of controversy whenever we share this, and this particular presentation has been part of whole school model, as I say, across the RIC and in lots of authorities, and this particular focus on learning intention is one that can cause some element of debate. Now, you may have been at university in the past few years where you may have been told that we can't measure children's understanding. But again, this is one of the myths and misconceptions that we absolutely want to dispel. We would suggest that if you didn't try and measure children's understanding, then why do we do what we do? We give them a skill to learn, we give them knowledge, and unless we try and capture their understanding, then we are not going to be able to build on that learning and to progress their understanding and to develop new learning. So we absolutely say learning intentions will promote and can measure understanding in children. So if you've given them the knowledge, and again, you perhaps see a context coming here, because understanding the causes of Holocaust. And in this situation, that would be appropriate to have that context there. But what are we measuring? Well, we're measuring that knowledge, and it's very, very different. So it's not understand the knowledge, or children have the knowledge, show the knowledge of the Holocaust, because we could absolutely have done a series of lessons on the 6 steps to genocide and the timeline of events during the Holocaust, and that would be knowledge. But unless we try and capture their understanding of that and give them opportunities through a success criteria, an effective success criteria, where they can show relevance to their own lives, where they can apply that knowledge and show elements that they've understood and can see the relevance or the parallels in modern day genocides and so on, then we absolutely don't know that they've understood all that we have taught them. And again, the same can be applied to things like the effects of diet and health, and all of that block of lessons. That topic could be done on healthy eating and 5 a day and all of those things. And that's the knowledge, and they may be able to recite that to you and spout that back to you, but until you capture their understanding of that, then that's not a skill that will transfer and can take on to use in other situations and other contexts for learning. So again, another example about persuasive language. Again, very, very wide there in terms of its persuasive language, but their understanding of that and how they can almost manipulate their audience, engage their audience and make their writing lively and interesting. And again, something that our children can fall down on in their writing here. If we've taught them all of the adjectives, can they then apply that and show their understanding to engage that engage their audience in their writing? So understanding absolutely builds on that knowledge and I would say on those skills, but here can you see where there's a deeper learning happening. We're getting that almost that secure learning, we're getting the evidence of that secure learning where children are starting to analyse and to interpret, and that's when we can start to make decisions around their learning and that they have actually overtaken elements of the skills and the knowledge that have gone before. So please again consider the role of this learning intention in measuring children's understanding. Okay, so now we show you the graphic that sums up the process of creating learning intentions really nicely, which is featured in our Education Scotland website, so absolutely definitive. And as we've described, your starting point is your experience and outcome, perhaps, yes, indeed, bundling experiences and outcomes. And then the next step in that would be those three key areas. What do I want children to know, understand, or the skill that I'm teaching them? And then finally, in the process of creating the learning intention, be very, very clear on what the expectation and the outcome, what's the experience you're offering them in terms of the teaching and learning experiences, the high quality teaching and learning, and what that outcome is. From the onset, you're very clear on what the outcome is, and it's linked very clearly and closely to assessment procedures. Now, one of the most common misconceptions and myths around learning intentions are the debate that rages around when to share learning intentions, and we asked to consider that prior to the webinar. And the question, when should learning intentions be shared with learners? So in reality, the key here is that they are shared. It's a fundamental requirement for learning and to support feedback on learning that the learning intentions are shared and that they're revisited. Without sharing those learning intentions, your children will just guess. Do you know that activity they do where they try and guess what's going on in your head and they try and work out what it is that you want them to do, and they will even guess to find out what it is, or they'll try and find out as they're going along, and I'll just stick with this and see where he or she's taken me with this. So sharing the learning intention must support children engaging with their learning goals. Again, I'd mentioned that it's the hook that's so important. So consider when we do share the learning intentions, because it can be at different points, as we're suggesting here. It can be at the beginning of a lesson or block of lessons. It can be to set the tone, to set the agenda, to set out what the learning will be. It has to give the children an idea of what it is that they're becoming involved in, or almost what they're signing up for. They have to have some idea about what it is that they're being asked to do. And as long as the purpose is clear, and as long as that is shared, then the focus will be clear and the children's focus will be clear on this. So it has to be relevant to them as well. So it can be at the beginning of a lesson to be that hook, or that block of learning, to be that hook, to be that the explanation that engages them and motivates them to go on that journey with you. However, the hook can be slightly different. The hook could be that you do set a problem, that you do throw up a concept or a challenge, and we know we're creative by our very, very, very nature of teachers. We're creative, and it may be the children come into class and there's big muddy footprints all over the floor, or there's a message from the elf on the shelf, or there's a video where there's a big dinosaur walking through the classroom and upset all the tables. Whatever the hook is, that can then open up that exploration of a problem or a situation or something that will lead on to then what their learning is going to be. But what is important here is that it's shared. And it could absolutely be that it is just up there on the board and not all singing, all dancing. And that may be appropriate. It can't be the all singing, all dancing for every single lesson, and it may just be something that's there on the board, and that will be appropriate. But the balance has to be struck because we don't want to kill some pupils' interest before the lesson has even begun. Okay, and some learning intentions, of course, are perhaps at the beginning of a lesson or a block, or are absolutely overarching and will last for maybe several lessons, but perhaps supported with success criteria that will then evolve and progress the learning. So the message here is that, again, it's about your consideration about when that happens, when you share the learning intentions. But again, as we say, fundamentally, it's a requirement that you do share, and that you take those opportunities to continually refer back to the learning intentions, to continually return, to give the feedback, to give the reminder, to give the support to the children as they're on their learning journey within that lesson. And that's how you will use and make your learning intentions effective. I'd like to share here with you some of the common errors in learning intention, and this is an activity that you can complete after our webinar. And the most common mistakes when creating learning intentions can be that it's just describing the task or the activity or the context rather than the focused learning. And you can see some examples there and you can pick them out. Too wordy, all too often we see them when they're being far too wordy, which is again would not make an effective learning intention. And again, the focus of the learning is not made clear. So those are three areas to avoid and to consider when you're creating your learning intention, and have a look at those learning intention there, those examples, what category do they fall into, and why are they not effective? Something for you to consider. As part of our post-webinar task, we are going to ask you to up-level, if you like, some learning intentions in your breakout rooms. And this is just an example of that, where you can see how these have been up-leveled and improved. So again, would seem really, really obvious. Again, the context has been taken back and the skill has been applied. The bar chart to show how pupils travel to school, to present information graphically. Now, again, that learning intention, which is focusing on information graphically, so the children have the autonomy to use whichever form of representation that they want. Could come at the end of a block of teaching that has covered pie charts, line graphs, bar charts, and so on. However, if it's at the beginning, then you may want to say to present information using a bar chart, and that would be appropriate for the learning there because it's very focused. And again, to be able to work effectively in a group without that context sitting there. And again, what's the learning? What is it, the skill that's happening here to work effectively? Well, the success criteria that sits under that would support what that working effectively looks like, what the success in that would be. So that would be your task, to up-level and to improve learning intentions in that way, and to consider all of the things that we've just covered prior to this in learning intentions and what they should be. And finally, here's some more examples of effective learning intentions. So, considering all that we have said, all that we have shared with you around learning intentions and what they should be, and how we plan for them, I would like you to consider, and we can pick this discussion up, why are these effective? What is it that's going to support children's learning by these using persuasive language, bearing in mind the myths and misconceptions, bearing in mind those common errors, and bearing in mind how these could be used. So why are these effective, and how could you use these effectively in your classroom? And that's something we're going to pick up as part of our post-webinar discussion. So we hope we've established the importance of learning intentions and what the fundamental elements of these key players in progressing and accelerating children's learning. But what we want to do now is establish the very important role of success criteria has in supporting learning intentions and ensuring that they are as effective as they possibly can be, because until we provide strong and again effective success criteria, then the learning intention in itself can become defunct. It can actually become stagnant and not progress learning at all. So the role is key for success criteria, and I suppose, to put it very, very bluntly, its role is to break down those high quality learning intentions that you have created and break it down into steps for success, as the term is suggested, and that we explored in terms of why we call it success criteria. That's it put, as I say, very, very simply, that it must give children the steps to success, to overtake that learning intention, to overtake that learning outcome, to overtake that skill or that new knowledge, or demonstrate that understanding, and that must be achieved through success criteria. So now, to consider success criteria and how we make them as effective as we possibly can, we first start to ask ourselves, well, what are success criteria? And as we've suggested, it outlines the way in which the learner can achieve the learning intention, how they will overtake that. They must be clear, again, that unambiguous language that we spoke about for learning intentions. Relevant, we spoke about relevance again. The children need to see, where can I use this? Where is this making sense to me? And for me, the key, the most important part, is that they are measurable definitions of success. And I will go on and explain what we mean by that they have to be measurable. As we've mentioned, linked to learning intention. But success criteria, as we've already outlined, have to relate to specifically to an activity. So we know that our learning intentions can be an overarching guide or a goal in learning, and can be for a block of lessons or over a couple of lessons, or can change every lesson. However, what does need to be specific to every activity that perhaps need to evolve and need to change as the children overtake the success criteria is their link to a specific activity. So that's very, very important, that success criteria are not there and there for a significant period of time, that children are overtaking them and building upon them. Again, very obvious, written and language learners can understand. Again, it's not the place to be using technical jargon and so on. It's about being very, very clear in what it is. And here's another one of those myths and misconceptions. The debate can rage on about the number of success criteria that we must have, and again, have heard many, many different schools of thought around this. And again, the definitive, they can be no more than 5. No more than 5. No less than 3. Again, when it is appropriate. Certainly we would be encouraging you to have no more than 5. Around about 3 is an optimum, but in your primary 1 class, for a short 10-minute burst, it may very well be that if you are saying to write a sentence and you're only having one success criteria, and that's to have a capital letter, because that's the level of support that those children need in that lesson, and that's how they will be successful, then you can see why that would work. It could be two. However, what we don't want and what we ask you to survive is a list of success criteria. It just will not be overtaken in that short space. And again, how will children achieve or see success when all they see is a long list of things that they've not actually succeeded in? Okay, they are absolutely about scaffolding and supporting learning, but here again is a health warning around this. And I use a Forrest Gump analogy here. And those who've heard this before, I apologise for repeating it, but it sums up for me exactly the role of success criteria and scaffolding. Forrest Gump had his calipers when he needed them, when he needed that support, when he wasn't able to manage that task, he had the support there. But then there came a point where the calipers were inhibiting him, where they were actually getting in the way of him progressing and achieving more. And you saw that wonderful scene where he ran free and broke free of his scaffolds, if you like. So gauge very carefully the amount of scaffold that you give children in a success criteria, and be aware of those glass ceilings, be aware of those limitations, and we'll address that again. It should support and not inhibit. Okay, so perhaps, for example, if you're saying to a child, and we talk about this again about numbers and success criteria, so perhaps if you're saying to use 3 wow words, and that could be a good support to the child, it could be, yeah, that's what I need to do. However, if that child's capabilities could be 3, 4, 5, 6 wow words, you can see how that's going to put that caliper on their particular learning in that particular lesson. So again, consider this at the planning stage. Consider what the role of the success criteria in that particular lesson. Okay, we spoke and touched upon the measure. That's what your success criteria will do. You will use that. It's an assessment. It's absolutely an assessment to decide whether the learner has met the learning intention, okay? It's those steps to success. But also, please use them to understand how well, okay, has the child overtaken the learning intention and success criteria to a minimum degree, to a very advanced degree, and I'm going to consider types of success criteria that will foster that and a wee bit more, and think about how we can measure just how successful have they been, have they produced an excellent piece of work because of the type of success criteria. So we will hold on to that. Again, the how is so important, how the learning will be assessed. And again, for those of you who know me, my first question is, whenever I look and I see a set of success criteria, either on the board or on the smart board or as it co-created, as we'll go on and discuss, the first thing I will ask myself is how. To work well as part of a group, how. To write an interesting story starter, how. And unless those success criteria have the answer to that question, then they're not effective. Unless the child knows the how, it's not effective. They will not know what to do. Again, breaking it down into clear language, for example, to say to use 3 wow words in my story starter, or to use colour in my spooky setting. That is where you are understanding the how because of the words that they'll choose or the number that they'll choose. So that's always got to be your question that you ask yourself when you're writing a success criteria. And of course, improve understanding of what success looks like and how to achieve it. Success criteria drives so many things within a lesson, as does a learning intention. And again, one of the ways is children's engagement. We spoke about the hook for the learning intention. This will also be your hook here. And I think success criteria are absolutely key. If a children can understand what it is that they've got to do, and they know how they're going to achieve it, and they experience success at regular intervals when you're checking into the success criteria, then you will have a child that's engaged, you'll have a child that's motivated, you'll have a child that will have increased self-esteem, you'll have a child that will have increased confidence. So immediately there you're putting that child in the correct disposition to learn. Do you remember we spoke about that in effect sizes? The child's disposition to learn, 0.61, gave a good return. Here's how we can create that. Here's where we can make the child's disposition to learn a positive one, and it's through effective success criteria. These will help you as a teacher when you're designing a task, not only for the children, but for when you're designing a task. One of the areas that we see most frequently that does require attention and consideration within lessons is pace. And I would say that your success criteria can ensure effective pace. And we'll go on and we'll think about that again at another point in considering success criteria. But when you're designing that task, when you're planning that task and you're planning a success criteria, what you're actual fact doing is considering the pace within the lesson as well as the challenge, but the pace there. And it'll help when designing a task. Now, we're not talking specifically here about co-creating success criteria. We will address that. But when the children are designing a task and children involved, it keeps them very, very focused. Okay, so again, those key points that were made around children's engagement, children's focus again can be on the task when they're very, very clear what it is that they need to do and that they know their role in that. Again, when you're considering interventions in your classroom, when you're considering ways to change your practice, things like self and peer assessment have got to be taught. And we will address this. This will be part of a future webinar. But where do you teach children to self and peer assess? Well, it has to be taught explicitly, but in success criteria, it's absolutely key when you're trying to teach children those skills, because you're teaching them the independence, because they see the success criteria on the wall, on the board, or you continually referring back to it. They see it, they understand it, they know what they need to do next, they're aware of the task, they're aware of their role, they're aware of... And when you then ask them to self-assess, measure themselves against the success criteria, they do that far more proficiently than perhaps doing a random point in a lesson. So link it to the success criteria and they will become, as I say, proficient in self-assessment. And in peer assessment, it won't just be traffic light, no, you're red because I fell out with you at playtime, so no, I don't like your writing, you're red. Based on the success criteria, the children will be able to assess each other's work, focusing on the success criteria, focusing on the things that they know that will make their learning successful, that piece of work, that bit of learning successful, and they will become very, very adept at being able to self and peer assess. Feedback. Now, we're going to go back and we will go on rather and look at feedback. And it's one of the big high hitters. And so the effect size of self and peer assessment is also above the 0.4, so to be considered. But feedback is a very high hitter up there at 0.75. Again, success criteria promotes that. If you use your success criteria in the correct manner and not just have it up at the beginning of the lesson and then only refer to it back in your plenary or the post-mortem, then it's not effective. If you continually refer back to success criteria, if it's Timaeus, love that word, Timaeus, and you're giving the feedback to the children all of the time, you're getting that live feedback throughout the lesson, they see themselves overtaking the success criteria, or equally they see that they're not overtaking the success criteria, and you can intervene and you can support, or they can then adapt, or they can then change, and what that then does is support their learning in a very effective way. So feedback, success criteria, learning intentions, all absolutely inextricably linked, and you can see where these interventions can start to feature, and you can see how you can manage them in your classroom in a very practical way. Also to consider that the success criteria have clear steps and processes. Not always necessarily incremental, although it is important at times to make them incremental and that they are overtaken in an order, but that's not always necessarily. But what it can't be is just a list of targets. And that can be a common mistake with common error, if you like, with success criteria, where it's just describing the activity. So it's number one, colour in your picture. Number two, cut out your picture. Number three, stick your picture in your jot. List of targets, list of tasks, list of jobs. In actual fact, what could have been happening there was a sequencing activity, which is absolutely a fine piece of assessment to understand children's comprehension of a reading task or whatever. But if not put out that way or described that way in the success criteria, then you're not capturing that and can't be used as a good piece of assessment to understand children's learning or understanding of that piece of reading that they've done. It's just a checklist. It's a tick list, and that can be a common error with success criteria. Again, this is probably where it's not it's the process and not the product. Okay, so that's what it has to happen. It has to happen on the process. So like that, back to draw a cat. By the end of the lesson, you will have solved 3 problems. You will have written a diary extract or have created a rainbow. And it's back to that. I get back to that again. My focus. How am I going to do all of that? So it's the key steps of the process and not the process, you know. So is it using an open number line, or is it using my math strategies, or is it using blending colours to create the rainbow? Is it to use charcoal, large brush strokes, or whatever the actual how of it is, the skill, if you like, then that can be a feeling of success criteria then. So it must focus on those key elements. I have seen success criteria used very creatively when using differentiation within a lesson. And again, you're creative professionals and you will know how you do that within your classroom. But some of the best examples I have seen have been where there's perhaps a success criteria that's around challenge. And it's one where the children know they can go on and be challenged in their learning. There can be different sets of success criteria for differentiation with different learners, and again, very, very appropriate to do that. But again, as long as it's not got that glass ceiling, okay, as long as it's not self-limiting, as long as all of the learners are being challenged, and there's a way that we can do that, and I'm going to go on and speak about the different types of success criteria that can do that, where we can perhaps differentiate in that way. But whatever methods that you do use to differentiate within your success criteria, then it has to be effective and it has to happen. Again, a common error is there's just one set of success criteria for a whole class, and we're still a composite class. In actual fact, it's wholly inappropriate and should be differentiated where there's challenge and support built into success criteria. So now again, dispelling some of the myths and misconceptions and the great question, to co-construct or not to co-construct? That is the question. So there's a very clear balance that has to be struck, because co-constructing success criteria can at times be quite time consuming. So we have to strike the balance between co-constructing success criteria and having those already constructed success criteria at the ready, if you like. Now, there is absolutely a place for both, and again, a balance has to be struck based on, again, know thy impact. What is it that you want to achieve from both of those approaches to success criteria? So absolutely, yes, you may have a set of success criteria already there for the children to engage with, because perhaps it's at the beginning of a block of learning or the beginning of a lesson, and the children may not have the knowledge or the skills to be able to come up with what that success criteria looks like. Again, it may just suit that particular lesson that you're doing that you have pre-constructed those success criteria. Both can be equally as effective. However, what must accompany a pre-constructed set of success criteria is that dialogue. Dialogue is essential to every success criteria, because we could have a beautifully written set of success criteria that could not be as effective as it should be, because there's not efficient and insufficient dialogue that takes place on the teacher's part. So these can be highly effective as long as the teacher is engaging the children with the success criteria and going through them, and in taking opportunities to model to them either their thinking or modelling them actually taking part in overtaking one of the success criteria, modelling to the children what a good example of that would be, and that would ensure that the previously constructed success criteria would be as effective. So they do absolutely have their place. It's about you using your professionalism to understand where they feature. Because at times the co-created success criteria can be quite lengthy and be quite a task, and the balance has to be struck, because if there's an over-reliance on pre-constructed success criteria, there is the danger that it's quicker, but what you can perhaps find is that children may misunderstand, that they may just be a list of tasks that they perceive it to be, and in fact it could be downright just ignored unless you have that high rich quality of dialogue that should accompany it. But when you do use co-constructed success criteria, what you will get is with that high quality dialogue, is an opportunity to share with the children some examples, as we discuss here, examples of what success looks like, a very good piece of writing, for example, or a very good strategy used to calculate in number, and children then can engage in that and see what the good elements are of that, and also equally a flawed model of success, one that's not so good, and again the children can say, no, they didn't use a punctuation there, or those wow words weren't interesting, or it wasn't lively, or the paragraphs were too long, should be, of course, all of those things that you would elicit from the children, and they would then see as very clear steps to their success. So what you will gain from co-constructed success criteria is children being more independent when they then go off to task, independent in their learning, and again that is something that may feature as part of your case study for improvement, that you want to foster children's independence in their learning, and again success criteria can foster that. Children will take ownership because they will truly understand the steps to success, because of the opportunities they've had to engage with them to help. So that ownership is there too, and that will motivate them, give them the confidence, give them the self-esteem that we're looking for. And it will also give you, the teacher, a firmer belief of the children's understanding of what the expectations are, and also that when you come to assess, that you have that confidence in the children and what the assessment is telling you. So absolutely, to be welcomed as an approach to success criteria. But for more reading on that, then I would direct you again to John Hattie's Visible Learning series, where he does explore that and some activities that teachers can engage in. Another very, very important way to use a success criteria is to review children's learning. Okay, while we say yes, they can be pre-constructed and they can appear on the board or the smart board, they have to be continually interacted with and continually returned to. And when you do that, you're taking opportunities to review children's learning. So children are seeing when they overtake steps of the success criteria. They can see small steps in success And when you review that, that gives you that feedback that you need about the direction of the lesson. And we're not getting on that learning intention roller coaster and just riding it to the plenary or the post-mortem without those check-ins. And without those check-ins, you will leave so many children behind. So it is important you review the children's learning. And that feedback is something that we'll touch upon in a future webinar. And we'll see how we can do that through hinge point questions and so on. But your success criteria lends itself very, very well to doing that and to making sure that you have all children with you and we leave no child behind. The success criteria supports that. Another highly important area of your practice is your pace of your teaching and learning, your pace within your lesson. And again, success criteria supports this greatly. So as you do those regular check-ins, as you do review the learning, you are then ensuring that the pace is correct for the children. So it's not too slow. And because those check-ins are giving you that feedback, that live feedback that you receive but you give to the children about the pace. Are things going too slow? Are you going too quickly? Because when you review the learning, you've left so many children behind, and that then would adjust your pace of the learning that and the teaching and learning that's going on at that time. So again, success criteria excellent in terms of pace of a lesson. And again, I think you immediately affect the pace of your lesson when you give the real consideration to success criteria at the planning stage, because you have carefully considered those steps to success. So therefore you're more aware of your pace and you're more aware of those, especially if it's incremental. Your success criteria are incremental, as we say, that you are having those check-ins that will affect the pace of your learning and make it far more efficient. So again, here is a strategy that we know and that we want to be happening in our classroom. We want our children to be articulate and to be able to talk about their learning. Opportunities for learning conversations, but also those key opportunities that you provide through collaborative and cooperative activities when children, say in active learning, are talking about what they're learning or what they're doing. Again, your success criteria supports this so well, as long as they promote discussion around learning and not just a description of the task. So you can see why a list of jobs is never going to equip children to be able to talk about their learning. But if you were to ask a child about what they were learning and they can refer back to the success criteria, that they naturally tune back into the success criteria, that they look to the success criteria to be aware of what it is they're learning, then they will become proficient. Again, that proficiency in being able to talk about their learning. Please do not use your success criteria for things that are immeasurable. Contribute to discussion, pay attention, work quietly, because again, all I will be saying is, how are you measuring that? Contribute to discussion? Yeah, fair enough. We saw one of our learning intentions to work as part of a team. Okay, yeah, and what I said was success criteria need to sit under that to support that. So that's absolutely fine. Contribute to discussion by giving your opinion, or contribute to discussion by telling two facts of the story is measurable. Pay attention. I'm not quite sure how we measure that, because if we could, then we would. So be very, very careful not to focus on in fact, do not let them appear or feature in your success criteria. Again, I have said this and I'll say it again, modelling is so important, and especially here I'm saying is if it's not co-created success criteria and it is perhaps a list that you have, or not a list, sorry, the key steps in learning, the steps to success, that you have decided is what the best approach for that particular lesson is, then take opportunities there for peer or teacher modelling, where you model your thinking, as I've already mentioned, and showing examples of good practice. We all love to see what it is that you want me to do here, what is it I'm aspiring to. And so do our children, and the success criteria is a place that should happen. As mentioned, there are different types of success criteria as there are learning intentions, and I think it's important to be aware of what these are. Again, I would direct you to Visible Learning Feedback by John Hattie and Shirley Clark if you choose this as part of your case study for improvement, or you choose this as something you want to focus on in your classroom. So these closed success criteria, or the rules, so we have closed and open, and we have rules and tools, which is how I remember the rules and the tools. So again, it's just about at that planning stage being clear on what the purpose is of the success criteria. So for example, these rules, it's the kind of the hufties, it's the kind of this must happen, this is how you will be successful with this. So the explanation is followed by all learners, so perhaps not necessarily for all learners. It can be differentiated, if it's around vocabulary or if it's around punctuation, there can be an element of differentiation there. But there's key things like, for example, if your learning intentions to use inverted commas, you can see there is absolute definitives on what that needs to be. Newspaper article, all the genres, report writing and so on, letters, there is absolute definitive success criteria that have to be undertaken. And again, constructing a bar graph and those things that must be present. So these are the rules, success criteria that supports and promotes those rules that are closed, that are fixed, but definitely show that there's steps to acquiring this skill identified in learning intention. So if it is the learning intention, inverted commas, punctuation is used before final speech mark, or take a new line for whenever there's a new person speaking. Speech marks must come at the beginning and at the end of the person speaking, and so on. Those things that must happen. What you won't see here is different degrees of excellence. There won't be someone whose punctuation is better than others, really, if you're teaching inverted commas, or maybe someone's bar graph will be neater than another's, but if they've got all of those key elements, then they've been successful in that. So it's important to be aware of those different types of success criteria and the role that they play. And as suggested, the other area that success criteria can focus on are the tools for being successful, or those open. And as you can imagine, they're open. There are opportunities for deeper learning, more opportunities for excellence, more opportunities for children to be challenged. So you can see how you can use these in a very, very planned way to progress children's learning. Okay, so as suggested here, they provide the same criteria for all children. So again, there's an element of differentiation coming in here, and it'll be used across the class or the group. But again, there'll be different degrees of success, different degrees of success. So perhaps a wee bit different from the closed success criteria or the rules. Here there are opportunities for children to really take opportunities to produce excellent pieces of work. And you can see some examples there with the, if you write, so the learning intention to create a story that uses suspense, if they use the show not tell, so all those kind of things. I had goosebumps, my mouth became dry, the hairs on the back of my neck, my knees went to jelly, all of those things that are not just saying the one thing. Also there, linking it to other areas of the curriculum, to add a 2-digit number. The success criteria could be that very, very, very open mental math strategies, but they're able to talk to you or to show you again how are you measuring that. Are the the assessment aspect there is to say, or are they using an open number line, or are they choosing a strategy to overtake that learning intention? And again, in the reading, they are focusing on inferential questioning, but they are choosing a reading strategy, a during reading strategy, that will help them answer those questions. So you can see there's children becoming independent in their learning here, children having opportunities to progress their own thinking and their own learning. So very, very effective form of success criteria here. But what is key here, because it is so open and children have got that degree of independence and choice and autonomy, key to this is effective feedback that must be provided on what the children have they used the open number line effectively, could they use it in a more productive way, have they used other skills, other areas that the success criteria could be varying the length of sentences or varying the use of sophisticated punctuations and so on. With that feedback, with models examples, children's skills will improve through this form of success criteria and should be carefully considered at the planning stage, again to support children's learning. So, after all of what we have identified as what success criteria should be, here's what they are not. Featuring in your success criteria should not be a completed piece of work or worksheet as part of a child being successful. It might be completed, it might be a piece of work. The content, accuracy, again, is not necessarily guaranteed, so that can't be where a child sees success when in actual fact it's not. We've already spoken about setting ceilings and a success criteria to answer 10 questions when a child may not be able to, or a child could answer 20 questions. So, not effective success criteria. And again, something that is a common mistake with success criteria is that task again. If you remember, the task and not the process, the product being part of the success criteria, poster or a PowerPoint presentation. Now, we recognise these are ways that pupils can demonstrate their learning, but in themselves are not success criteria. You want to use a PowerPoint presentation, the success criteria that sits under that would be perhaps to use animation, to use different font, to use different graphs, to use that you can understand, you can see posters, catchy headings, photographs. That's where the success criteria and in themselves are not measures of children's learning. So to link it all together, success criteria and to the learning intention, you can see here a very good example of a very precise and to the point and effective learning intention there, and very, very supportive success criteria. And you can see 3 in total, and I think very, very manageable for a child to experience success in their learning with that success criteria and learning intention. And I know the temptation is to have other elements included there. Again, often seen this where teachers are looking for handwriting to be clear and legible, spelling and written in paragraphs. And yes, they are important, they're absolutely important, but they should not feature as a success criteria because they don't directly relate to the learning that's taking place in terms of developing children's vocabulary. So therefore, this can be things that are running alongside and that children are aware of every day in their learning. It can be everyday success criteria if you like, but not feature when there's a specific area and focus for learning that's taking place and being supported through success criteria. So their place is a very different one in terms of children's learning. And one of the tasks that we'll ask you to do as part of your TRIO task before our next webinar will be to take an experience and outcome, as you can see here, and to develop effective learning intentions and success criteria. So here's an example of how that can happen and how it can be done effectively for you to peruse and to look over and to reflect upon as part of your TRIO task. And finally, learning intentions and success criteria are about what children need to know. Your role is to share that with them and to be explicit. More importantly, how are they going to be successful in that learning? And again, why? The relevance, the design principle, things being relevant for them. And a final thought that we'll pick up as part of our post-webinar discussion is around a study that was done by Dylan Williams around the effectiveness in learning intentions and success criteria. And we link this back to the theme that we've kept a hold of about what works for all children, all learners, and what works particularly well for those children who are facing multiple barriers or barriers to their learning. So the study that was conducted by Dylan Williams was 2 sets of children over a course of 16 weeks, where one set of children did take part in learning intentions and success criteria to progress their learning, and the control group, the class next door, did not. And learning was increased and attainment did rise in the class, and not surprisingly, who did have the opportunity to take part in lessons where they were supported by learning intention and success criteria. But more interestingly there was a distinct group of learners who benefited most from this. So who was it that benefited most from this group that I have here? Was it the group number 1 of all learners? Was it the group number 2 average learners who made most gains? Or was it 3, the most disadvantaged learners made most gains from learning intentions and success criteria? So, was it all? Some? Average children? Or was it our most disadvantaged? Consider that, please, and we look forward to hearing your responses. As mentioned throughout the webinar, we do direct you to some professional reading to support your reflections on this webinar in terms of learning intentions and success criteria, and especially if this is a consideration of yours to be an element of your practice that you're going to change or to improve upon as part of your case study for improvement. So thank you for listening. Thank you for all your thoughts, and I know the contributions that will come, but please do remember to tweet your thought of the day for webinar 4 on learning intentions and success criteria. Thank you.